Good evening, everyone. I'm Reihan Salam, president of the Manhattan Institute, and I'm delighted to be here tonight with Pano Kanelos. Until recently, Mr. Kanelos had one of the most enviable jobs in higher education. As president of St. John's College, he was at the helm of one of the most storied liberal arts institutions in the country, and he made waves by reducing tuition and strengthening the college's commitment to free speech and free inquiry. But rather than rest on his laurels, he announced last year that he was taking on a new project, one that could have a profound impact on American life. That project is called UATX, or the University of Austin. This new institution will distinguish itself in a number of ways. First, with the involvement of prominent free speech advocates such as Barry Weiss, it will carve out a place for open, reasoned debate without the threat of censorship. Second, its curriculum will celebrate the highest human achievements, both in the arts and in science and technology. And third, it will aim to remain affordable at a time when the cost of college is skyrocketing. The school is starting to host some events, summer classes, and fellowships this year, and hopes to have its first undergraduate and graduate classes in 2024. Later this decade, it plans to have about 1,000 students. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Pano, to answer some questions about this exciting new enterprise.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. This is really exciting, and to see all of you here on this evening. A lot of familiar faces, but some new faces as well. So it's just an honor to get a chance to talk about this. And I learned that we're being videoed, so I'm not allowed to swear because it's being recorded. So if I start swearing, somebody raise a hand. So,
Pano, let's start with a status update. UATX made a big splash when it was announced back in November, but there's a lot of work to do between deciding to start a new university and actually opening one. Where are you and your team in terms of setting up a physical location, hiring staff, deciding what courses to offer, and raising the necessary funds? What's been the most challenging?
So things are going really, really well. I mean, we really launched this effort publicly in November of last year, so less than 6 months ago. And I am delighted to say that we have raised now over $100 million in less than 6 months. Thank you. And we didn't have much to start, so that's mostly along the way. So that's very exciting. And to me, that is a sign of the enthusiasm for the project. We are on target to have our first class of freshmen in fall of 2024. When we started this project, I was told by experts that it would take 10 years to launch a university. And I said, we're going to do it in 3. And we're still on target to do that. We're going to have freshmen coming in 2024 on the new campus. So we're designing, developing the campus at this point. We'll start small and then build up to 1,000 students. It's, the interest has been humbling, to be honest with you. We've had over 5,000 now professors from other institutions reach out to seek employment with us. And that in of itself, I think, is a story that needs to be told about higher education. I mean, these are just the faculty who have reached out to us. So envision there is a silent, I don't know if it's a majority or loyal opposition or whatever it is out there in higher education of faculty who are disaffected at their institutions and are willing to take a chance with a new institution. Student interest has been phenomenal. We have the summer program we're starting this summer, June 12th. We're gonna have a 2-week summer program called the Forbidden Courses. Because if you label something forbidden, that's exactly what young people want to do. So it's a 2-week program, and these courses are going to be courses that other schools are, let's say, not eager to teach, or subjects that are difficult to talk about, things like, capitalism and empire and gender identity. And we want to create an environment where those things can be discussed openly, rationally, reasonably, in an environment of productive discourse and dialogue. So we're going to be offering those. We have 80 spots, 40 each week. And some of you have heard this. I was a little worried with this program because we're just starting, right? We haven't really marketed the program. We haven't, we put it on our website. We did some social media outreach. And I was worried. I'm like, 80, where are we going to find 80 students? If we don't find 80 students, it's going to be really embarrassing because people are watching what we're doing. So I told my team, some of them were here, I'm like, you guys, you got to call everybody your neighbors, everybody with college-age kids, tell them to come over. We got to get students to come to this program. As the last number I heard, this is probably 3 or 4 days old, we have had 33,000 inquiries from kids at other colleges about the program.
Wow.
All right, so it's competitive, so which is great, and the applications are coming in from across the board in higher education. The number one school for applications right now is Stanford. It just displaced Harvard. A lot of the elite schools, most of them are sending our student applications. Students from across the world. We have applications from University of the Sorbonne, from University of Tübingen in Germany, Leiden in the Netherlands, King's College in London, University of Edinburgh, schools in Australia, South Africa. So this is the other part of the story. If there are faculty out there at all these institutions who are alienated or who feel like things are not quite right at their own institutions, the students feel this way as well. They're reaching out for something. They're reaching out for an experience that they're not getting where they are. In fact, you have to write an essay to apply for the program, and I've been able to read some of the essays, and story after story, it's the same thing. You know, these students feel like they went to the university to have an intellectual adventure, and what they're finding is that they're keeping their head down, they're keeping quiet, and they're just trying to get through. One young man recently described this in his essay as, he said he was like Dostoevsky's underground man. That's how he felt. He felt that alienated at his own institution. So that's something of an update. We're moving ahead. Things are going faster than we expected. Got great velocity, and everything's encouraging. I mean, I'm just very thankful.
Tell us a bit about the accreditation process. Now, there are other folks in higher education who've attempted to start new ventures, and one thing that I've heard is that the accreditation process often acts as a kind of cartel. Essentially, these accrediting bodies are oftentimes composed of other incumbent higher education institutions that set very stringent, in some cases pretty arbitrary requirements as to what it takes to be a properly accredited institution. So I wonder about how you've thought about that, what options you have in terms of accreditation. One classic tactic is to acquire an existing institution of higher education, perhaps a small failing one,
Yep.
and to use that as the vehicle. But how are you guys approaching it?
I mean, a cartel is I think that's a generous way to put it. I keep forgetting I'm being recorded, but the barriers to entry for new universities are ridiculously high. We complain about the cost of higher education. We complain about the efficacy of higher education. The thing that we need to do to break up the system is to allow new institutions to emerge and to challenge existing ones. This is what you currently have to do to be accredited. It takes 7 to 8 years to become accredited. And you cannot, you get a kind of provisional status early on, but you have to admit students before you're accredited. You can't even tell them which accreditor you're using. So you're sort of in the process of getting accreditation. You have to graduate at least one class of students before you can achieve accreditation. So think about that barrier, right? You have to bring students in who know they're going to graduate from your institution before you're accredited.
What does it mean to graduate from an institution that is not accredited?
You can grant degrees,
right?
But your institution is not accredited. So you'll be able to grant them a degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, but they have to go through the entire program and then earn that degree. And we have to do that with a whole class. So think about how difficult that is as a barrier to entry.
Are there reputational risks for the graduate of this institution?
I mean, I think there could be. I mean, I think it's conceivable. Students bear along with them the reputation of the institution they have degrees from. So, I mean, I don't think it's going to be highly problematic because we are working on accreditation and will be accredited so that when students are out there on the job market, even if they're in that first class, they will have graduated from an institution that's accredited at that point. But it still, I'm sure, feels risky to some students. I mean, what if things were not to go the way that we had planned? And it's a system that is designed to squeeze out competition. It just is. And that's one of the reasons people complain about the cost of higher education. That's a driver right there. I mean, if we could open 100 new universities today, believe me, the cost of education would decrease rapidly, but we can't do it.
Pano, at the risk of putting you in an awkward position, you were at St. John's College, a place with a really sterling reputation for intellectual seriousness, a place that really is widely seen as a kind of oasis in a world of higher education that is otherwise incredibly conformist, a truly distinctive institution in terms of its mission and focus. And yet here you are deciding to start an entirely new higher education institution. What does that tell us about the possibility of reforming incumbent institutions from within so that they adhere to some of those virtues that you're hoping to build in this new institution?
Look, I think many people have tried to reform higher education from within with varying degrees of success. There are institutes and centers that are important places, but haven't yet been able to get the kind of traction to actually change things institutionally. St. John's is not a place that's desperately in need of reform, but St. John's is also, because of its nature, it's a small place. It's intended to be small. It's very inward looking. It's not a place where you can create a platform to reform the system at large.
So for you to come in and say, I want to make St. John's more ambitious, I want to scale up this institution 10x, I really want us to compete to be in the uppermost echelons of this hierarchy, partly because doing that would allow us to offer a challenge to those institutions that are occupying the top of the hierarchy now. That just isn't something that would have worked at a place like St. John's, is that?
It would have been irresponsible of me as the president to even propose that, because that's not what the institution wants. That's what, I mean, my desire is to reform higher education, but I can't use that institution as a platform to do that. I mean, St. John's is content in being St. John's, and it's wonderful that St. John's continues to be St. John's. So I had a wonderful experience there, and I think everything you said is right. It's a rigorous education. It's an institution that should be upheld as an example. It's a niche institution because it's entirely a great books program, and that's for some students, not for every student. But the students who go there do come out on the other end with an exceptional experience in education.
You don't need to tell me. You don't need me to tell you that though UATX is an institution that has already developed a very significant fan base, there are also detractors.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those detractors focus on the fact that you launched with a group of advisors, many of whom are people who are known for their strong political views, in some cases, polemical style of expression. There is this perception in some quarters that the University of Austin is going to be a conservative university. Now, of course, there are some of us who think that that would be absolutely fantastic. And there are others who say, well, wait a second, if you're all about free expression, hey, what does that mean? So tell me about what you see as the ideological character, if any. How would you situate the university? Where does it stand in these debates about the supposed liberal excesses of elite higher education today?
So I would say we're an institution that will be grounded in principles, not politics. And the principles are open inquiry, civil discourse, freedom of conscience, principles that we believe very strongly should be the foundational principles for any institution of higher education, and in many cases are to varying degrees. But we have to renew those principles. If one of the problems with higher education today is political asymmetry, and we know that it is, we know that institutions are radically imbalanced on one side of the political spectrum. The solution isn't just to create institutions on the other side, right? Because then you're just replicating the same kind of closed ecosystem that is causing institutions to compromise, let's say their intellectual integrity by not being open enough to heterodox ideas. So I think our goal is what I would really like to do is transcend politics altogether. I think an institution of higher learning should be a place where politics are studied, but politics should not be the operating system of the institution, right or left. Now, having said that, we want to be an institution where conservatives will be very happy to be and be intellectually at home and engaged, and they're going to be happy to be there because there are going to be people on the other side that they get to talk to, and that we're going to really have an exchange of ideas and really create opportunities for us to learn from one another and to sharpen the positions we hold, or maybe even change those positions.
We have Jonathan Haidt here in the audience, and one thing that he's discussed is this idea that we should welcome the idea that some universities are going to be social justice universities that are devoted to that particular pursuit, and others are going to style themselves as truth-seeking institutions. And in a way, that the problem we have is the dearth of those institutions falling in that latter category. But I want to push back a little bit. What do you think about the idea that, in a way, your emphasis on what I'll call pluralism within the institution maybe should be counterbalanced by pluralism across institutions. That is to say, we are in this very isomorphic world of higher education in which there's Michigan State wants to be like the University of Michigan, the University of Michigan wants to be like Princeton, and there's this incredible conformity that stems from that. Wouldn't it be a good thing if we had more institutions that have a very particular worldview and ethic and consistently adhere to that, rather than mimicking the elite institution, 100 miles across the way?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think there should be heterogeneity across higher education. I mean, that's been the great strength of American higher education, is that we have so many different kinds of institutions: small, large, public, private, regional, global, faith-based, secular. And I think each of these schools has a distinctive contribution to make. I think part of the problem is schools are not as distinctive as they used to be. So there's this kind of just genericizing, I don't know if that's a word, but genericizing of institutions so that they're all sort of compelled to move lockstep in one particular ideological direction, with a few exceptions, because the expectation from the culture at large is that that's what legitimate institutions of higher learning do, or that's how they prepare students. So look, 1,000 flowers blooming would be fantastic. I have no problem with that. I just don't want one great big old sunflower. And so we're trying to plant a different kind of seed.
Pano, I noticed that you talk about building a culture of open inquiry and civil discourse. And I wonder, there is this subtle issue at play in some of these debates we have about the state of higher education, in which some talk about free speech per se, but then then there's a question of not just about the freedom to say whatever it is you'd like to say, whether it is speaking or denouncing other speaking, but you talk about this idea of a culture in which I'm putting words in your mouth, but in which you're kind of welcoming a certain kind of civil disputation. So what you're celebrating is not so much allowing one guy to shout and allowing another guy to shout, but it's rather a different kind of cultural. Am I getting that right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. No, look, the purpose of university education is not to have a platform to share your opinions. All right, that's not the purpose. The purpose of university education is to have a platform to have dialogue, right? The idea is that if what we're meant to do at a university is to learn, all right, we have to ask questions, both of the subject matter that we're looking at and of ourselves. All right, so we should constantly be self-reflecting. If we have, if we're so confident in our opinions that we're immovable and we just want a soapbox to shout from, do it somewhere else. That's not learning. That's not education. Education is grounded in dialogue. And dialogue ultimately is dependent upon relationships of trust across difference. Civil discourse, I speak a lot about civil discourse, and I generally say there are 3 elements of civil discourse. And I think these are essential for the university classroom. The first is intellectual humility, right? We're all human beings. We know some things. We don't know everything. Some of us know a little, some of us know a little bit more. Very few of us know a lot. And so we have to remember who we are and what we actually know, how firmly we should hold on to what we know. The second element is recognizing the fundamental dignity of all interlocutors in the conversation. We are all creatures of logos. We all have epistemic equality. And so when we sit down to talk with one another, we have to have that dignity first and foremost in our mind. And the third piece is a passion for truth. The purpose of dialogue, and I think of dialogue in a kind of Socratic way, it's just how I'm built. The purpose of dialogue is to seek the truth. So if you begin with intellectual humility, you recognize what you don't know, but you have a passion to try and know the world better. The way that you achieve that is through conversation with others. We each have fragments of things that we're trying to put together into a clearer mosaic. And will we ever actually discover this thing called the truth? Probably not, or at least not about very many things. But I think we can move closer towards things that are true.
Pano, you're very much a creature of the liberal arts. You're a product of the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago. And here you are now building this institution in Austin with the partnership of a great many technologists, engineers, people who have a bent from that other of the 2 cultures. And I wonder, there's this ongoing debate about whether or not education should be about the liberal arts and about, kind of mastering the kind of best of our cultural inheritance. And this other tendency, which emphasizes the idea of imparting practical skills, practical knowledge. There is a frustration among many with higher education at large that it hasn't adequately prepared a lot of young people, including at elite institutions, for making their way in the world in a kind of practical nitty-gritty sense. So I wonder, how do you reconcile those tendencies? Where do you see the University of Austin, amidst that divide?
I think it's a both and situation. I think in the liberal arts tradition, there have been sort of two strands of the tradition. One, let's call the philosophers, and these are people who are seeking after knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And the other strand are the orators, people who are using their education to prepare for public life. I don't think it's an either or. I think a true liberal arts institution is teaching students the sort of the habits of intellectual rigor, allowing them to ask the important questions, giving them the tools to think deeply, while preparing them to act in the world in one way or another. And at St. John's, at UATX, we're going to do old habits. We're going to synthesize these things in a way. It's either this, our curriculum is either brilliant or it's really clumsy and stupid. I don't know which one yet. We're working on it, but this is how I conceive of it now. We have 4 years. All right. And why higher education is 4 years, that's a whole other question we could talk about later. We have 4 years. Right. For the first 2 years for undergraduates, they're going to take a 2-year comprehensive liberal arts program. It's going to focus mostly on books that are great and questions that are big. And it'll be divided equally between 3 parts: the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. Discussion based, help students, sort of dive deeply into what it means to be a human being, what it means to live in the world, who they are in the context of the traditions and legacies that have been handed to us. And then they switch gears. Right at the end of year 2, every student is going to propose what we call their Polaris project. Polaris is the North Star. They're going to spend the next 2 years of their undergraduate experience aiming for something really high and large. Their moonshot project. They've been thinking about big human questions. How do they want to apply that knowledge in the world? And so we're going to ask them to come up with something that seems almost impossible to achieve. Some of the examples we've used, like maybe they're going to create a robotic delivery system for vaccines in third world countries, or they're going to have they're going to create a symphony, and write it from scratch, and then open their own regional symphony company. Now, we don't anticipate that most students will actually get to that endpoint, to that telos, but we want them to spend 2 years moving in that direction, solving the problems, formulating the questions, figuring out what resources they need, figure out who to talk to, bringing it all together so that they're thinking about how to take the things that are of value for them and then channel that in a direction that seems to them to be meaningful, that will add to their own flourishing and to greater human flourishing. And in that 3rd and 4th year as well, rather than have majors, students will be what we call junior fellows in one of our centers of inquiry. So instead of traditional academic departments, we're going to have centers of inquiry that are like research centers, think tanks, institutes that are thematically based, that are the home of scholars and academics and practitioners who themselves are engaged in their own Polaris projects and moonshot projects. And the students will become junior fellows and work with these folks on those projects that they're doing. So we're going to go from thought to action, contemplation to applied knowledge. To me, this seems like the kind of arc that will propel students in the world to both know things and do things.
There's clearly an enormous appetite for the kind of education you're offering, as evidenced by the interest in the Forbidden Courses program and much else. Yet, you're trying to attract very competitive students who will have a great many options when it comes to higher education. And it is a new institution that entails some risk. Tell us about the Uatx Promise and how you're thinking about that question of risk, how you're thinking about the kind of financial model of financing a UATX education.
So, I mean, everybody knows that the financial model of higher education is broken. The cost of higher education is rising precipitously. The ability of students and families to pay for education is flatlining or declining. The system is collapsing. Schools are going under. Fewer students are going to college. There are 1 million fewer students today in higher education than there were before COVID. All right. And part of the reason is that these students feel like their goals are not being met by institutions of higher learning, their ambitions. So, how do we restructure the financial model of higher education to serve students and to create sustainable institutions? A piece of this for us is to take very seriously our partnership with students. What happens to students once they launch from the university? Most schools are perfectly happy to have a rigorous admissions process and then have students show up and start paying tuition. And there's a career center, maybe they get an internship and they kind of pat them along back, and then they hope that every student's going to make a lot of money, so they become donors and give back to the institution. What we're proposing with the Uatx Promise is that every one of our students will be supported by Uatx in 3 ways. Every single student who graduates is going to be eligible for a $100,000 seed grant to start a new project. All right, it's competitive, so they don't automatically get this, but it's like Shark Tank. They're going to come to us with their entrepreneurial ideas, their ideas for a new tech company, a new nonprofit, whatever it is, something that looks worthy of investing in. And we're going to give them the chance to pitch to the university, and the university is going to invest in their future success. And think about the kind of effect on students over the 4 years, knowing that that's a possibility, Dan, how motivating that will be for some students to think about as they're thinking about that Polaris project. Maybe I can actually launch this or make it work. So that's one element. The second element is we're working right now with what we're calling a employers council. We have leaders from several different significant and well-known companies and organizations that are creating for us a network of now dozens, soon to be hundreds of companies and organizations that want to invest in the future of our students, that will start interacting with the students the moment they get there, provide internships, apprenticeships along the way, cultivate long-standing relationships with them so that when they prepare to graduate, they'll interview with them, and hopefully many of them will move on to these companies. And then the third part of it is, and this one's a little radical, so and we're working on the details, all right? But this is what you get to do when you build a university from scratch. You get to do stuff that's kind of radical, all right? We are hoping to and planning on guaranteeing for every single graduate of UATX 5 years worth of median salary when they graduate. So when they graduate, whatever the median salary for their field is, after 5 years, we're going to guarantee that they've made 5x of that salary. And if they haven't, we're going to pay the difference. Why are we doing that? Because we have so much confidence in the education we're providing that we want students to know that we believe in what we're doing and we believe in them. But we also recognize that to spend, we're only planning on having tuition be $30,000 a year, which is half of what most private schools are. But to spend $120,000 in education, they're investing in us. We want to have their back and know that we would invest in them in return. So it's a measure of our commitment to a partnership with our students. So we're hoping through those sorts of things, and maybe others will emerge, but through those sorts of pathways, that we're going to convince students that that they should be focusing on education and learning, and that that there will be prospects for them, wonderful prospects when they graduate, and then they can spend their time with us reading books and having great discussions.
Before we turn to the audience, I'd like to ask another question. So you mentioned 33,000 students expressing an interest in one of 80 slots. Now, part of it is that, well, once you ask for an essay, once you create some barrier to entry, okay, maybe that number's somewhat smaller, but it's still very, very large.
Yeah.
So when you're establishing this new institution, let's assume everything goes swimmingly, everything goes very well, as I believe it will. You are going to have the challenge of determining how do you actually put together a class. There are very contentious debates going on right now about the use of standardized testing, about racial preferences in higher education, much else. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach, how you and your team think about this question of admissions? You've been unapologetic about wanting this to be an elite and selective institution that is training leaders for the future. So tell us a bit about how you think about that and how you think about the, what some would describe as the imperative of diversity.
Look, we want to attract the best and brightest to create the next generation of innovators, builders, and leaders. I think the best and brightest are universally distributed across all groups of people in all places at all times. I just think they are. I think we need to figure out how to find those kids. I mean, if basketball coaches and recruiters can go out and find the most talented students by actively seeking them, why can't admissions offices at universities do the same? Why can't we be cultivating pipelines of students early on, even well before they're thinking about coming to college? So the best and brightest out there, and they're everywhere. I mean, I was a first generation college student. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I don't know how the hell I got to college. I don't even remember how I stumbled into it. If we just put a hand out there and we reach out, I think we're going to have an amazing array of students who are going to be judged based upon their talents, judged based upon the prospects that they're bringing to the university to be wonderful learners and partners in our project, and that we're gonna find ways to I just want to say just break through a lot of the nonsense that we currently see in higher education.
So you're not embracing a template. You're not embracing the Caltech template or the Harvard template. You might not have it yet, but you're working towards your own approach to actively recruiting.
We're working towards our own approach. And again, I mean, it's the quality of mind, it's the quality of heart that we're looking for. And to me, look, that's colorblind. I mean, I just don't even see how that, how some of the kind of more superficial ways of defining people impact that. I just don't see it. And look, I'm also pragmatically, I understand these are challenges.
Will you look at SAT and ACT scores?
Yeah. Why not? I love the SAT and ACT. I think they're awesome. I think they're part of the bigger puzzle. But we all know that they're accurate measures of intellectual aptitude. Why wouldn't we look at that? But there are other things. We judge people by the heart as well, not just, by their intellectual aptitude.
Thanks very much, Pano. Now I'd like to take questions from the audience. When I call on you, please wait for the microphone and let us know your name and your question.
Am I called on? Yeah, okay. Hi, Stephen I at Manhattan Institute and St. John's College. I want to ask you about how you think about demographic decline. You touched upon this a little bit when you're talking about the broken financial model, but when you talk about the enrollment challenges, it's not just because more people are deciding that college is a bad deal, but the number of graduating high school seniors is projected to decline. Many people think that means the number of small private liberal arts colleges are going to go out of business. Why do you think you're going to be exception to that trend?
There is demographic decline. I mean, we know you just have to count back 18 years so we know how many kids were born 18 years ago and how many kids are coming through the pipeline into the college system. There's a demographic cliff coming in the year 2025 where there's going to be a significant drop in the college-bound population. However, these demographic challenges are not distributed equally across the country. So mostly it's in the Northeast and the Midwest that we see the number of colleges. There are too many colleges for the college-bound population, and so a lot of those schools are struggling. In the area that we're going to be in Austin, Texas, which is maybe the most booming city in the world right now. That's attracting young people and businesses, and that the universities in Texas are bursting at the seams. So just geographically, I think that will offset the kind of demographic challenge to some extent. But yeah, look, schools are going to close. I mean, I personally know several schools that are schools that you've heard of that are on the brink of closing. And I think, but that doesn't mean that students are going to stop going to universities. They're just going to be looking for the best kind of experience. They can find the best university, the one that's going to match up with their values. And I think with the kind of institution that we're proposing here, one that is committed to the values that resonate with so many young people, that our demographic challenge is probably going to be, 33,000 to 80 and not struggling for students. So.
Hi, John Tomasi. I just want from Heterodox Academy. I just want to say, bravo to you for doing this. It's just fabulous. In the 1800s, America was known as a land of colleges because colleges were starting all over the place. There are 4 colleges in Cambridge, and there are 4 colleges in England in 1875. There are 40 in Ohio by itself. So America has a tradition of innovative experiments like you're doing, and I just think it's fantastic that you're doing it again, despite all the headwinds. My question is just about the funding and the financing, and specifically about the relationship of Austin to the federal government. Will you take federal money? Will students take loans? How do you see that part of the equation?
Yeah, we're looking into that now. I mean, our intention is, because we want to be as independent as possible, our intention is to try not to be entangled by taking federal money and public money. What we want to be sure is that we're not handicapping students who are in dire need in a way that's unnecessary. So we have a kind of consulting team looking into this. But really, we're trying to build a financial model that will not depend upon this money at all, and that will find financial aid for the neediest students from alternative sources. I think it's very important to maintain independence in that way. I do want to, can I just take a quick sidebar here?
Please.
Because John Tomasi's here from Heterodox Academy, which is an organization that I love. Here's an interesting snapshot into the state of higher education today, just to kind of give some flavor to our conversations. So Heterodox Academy has about 5,000 members. Is that right? Or how many? 5,500 members, and these are professors who are committed to the principles that we're committed to, and they're everywhere, and they're engaged on their own campuses and their own institutions, and they're planning events and their conferences and all that. Up until John became the president, which was recently, I think less than 6 months ago, the Heterodox Academy had a policy which I think made rational sense, that it would not release its membership list because the state in higher education is such that those people who want to follow these principles feel like they have to keep their head down at the institutions they're in. People were afraid of being known. Now, a wonderful development, and this is under John's leadership, is that John said, let's take a risk and let's tell our members that we're going to go public with our membership list. He was afraid, rightly, I think, that some people would, cancel their membership out of fear, didn't really know what the final results were going to be, but did it anyway on the principle that those who are challenged by their home environments, who are struggling for these principles, should know that there are others around them, even at their own institutions, who are committed to the same things. And so he made the choice, and they went public. They lost a few, but I think they gained many more. And what I've heard from people, even some people I know in the room here, Charlie and others, people were suddenly like, "Oh my God, I didn't know there were 8 people at my institution who were in Heterodox Academy." And that sense of solidarity is something really important to build on at institutions. So I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend John here in Heterodox Academy.
Outstanding. Kayla?
Hi, I'm Susie Leibovitz Edelman, and my question is, if you could talk a little bit about what I see as a crisis of meaning, and how that intersects with what you think has been broken or damaged in higher education. How the university seeks to address that.
Yeah, I think that maybe the best way for me to get to this question is, when we went out there, we made this public statement. We said, we stand for the fearless pursuit of truth. And that's a big thing to say, right? And a lot of universities said, well, we kind of do that. That's kind of what we do. And a lot of other people said, what are you talking about? What the hell is truth? And how could you stand for that? And the way I would categorize it is, in terms of the crisis of meaning at most universities today, is there's a kind of Scylla and Charybdis, two opposite forces. On the one hand, is this kind of belief to or commitment in relativism. The idea that there really isn't anything called truth. They're just truths and perspectives and all that. And this is kind of constantly shifting territory. And nobody should privilege their own truth or anything above anything else. So there's kind of relativistic pole. And on the other hand is this idea that there are things that are undoubtedly true, ideological things, social justice truths or that can't be questioned, right? So these things are in direct competition with each other, right? They don't compute. Things you can't have no truth at all, but say these things are totally true and you have to abide by these truths. And I think what a truth-seeking institution has to do is navigate between the Scylla of relativism and the Charybdis of ideology in the pursuit of something on the horizon, that North Star. And that, I think, is what gives universities purpose and gives them meaning. Universities are where we do our thinking. It's where we do our seeking. And I think once institutions veer too far in one direction, or actually hold both of those positions in a kind of schizophrenic way at the same time, it becomes harder to move forward. It becomes harder to set truth as your goal.
Hi there, Lorenzo Judge. By the way, terrific. This is super interesting, and I think building new institutions is, how we move forward, and it's very interesting. I have a question that relates so people before touched about building, kind of the right class, and I think, one of the enduring advantages of American civilization has been its ability to educate the best and brightest, not only in the United States but from all over the world. And so, first of all, I wanted to know, would you keep this institution only open to Americans, or would you want to invite people from all over the world, and sort of your thoughts on that? And then just in general, I wanted to just make the point that I think that the system right now is completely broken, in the sense that, I have a friend of mine, she went to Harvard and, she tried to stay here, and then, she lost the lottery for 3 years. And then I have people, who are very different caliber. And so definitely growing up abroad, as I have, and I've been fortunate to be able to stay and everything, I kind of the system with immigration and everything has been a huge problem. I think in terms of the appeal of people from all over the world wanting to come to the United States, because there's no guarantee and possibility in sort of being able to stay, and sort of kind of your thoughts on that process, and your thoughts on sort of including individuals from all over the world in your institution. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, we're already including individuals from across the world, even in our first summer program. So I think that kind of commitment, I think we have a total commitment to students coming from across the globe. On the immigration question, I think universities benefit tremendously from students who come from abroad and faculty who come from abroad. I think our students benefit tremendously from going abroad and having experiences abroad. So anything we can do as institutions to facilitate that, I think, is important, and important to advocate for those things. Unfortunately, we actually don't have too much control over those things. They're usually, beyond our purview, other than advocacy.
There are a few gentlemen up here who've been waiting patiently.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Arthur Corbin Powells. This is Chatham House, London, representing, and also I'm a founder of Project Ukraine. So we're going to rebuild Ukraine, and we're going to make the world a better place. But one of the things we're doing is we're doing a lot of educational dialogue and discourse, and we want to import the best of Western civilization, truly. So, a lot of people are pushing for cooperation with the older institutions, but is this too far-fetched? Is this too early? But, there's this strange moment of war, and one country fighting for a lot of the rest of the world. Is this too early to say international collaboration, maybe plan beyond Austin?
Well, I think that's why God gave us Scotch. You and I can talk about this and one-on-one over there. Of course. I mean, look, I think we're an institution that wants to collaborate as broadly as possible. All right. I mean, because the principles we hold, they're not our principles. They're the world's principles. I mean, and so, yes, let's talk. I would love to talk more about that. That'd be great.
We have Ken and John.
Ken Gilman, you spoke about building the student body. How about addressing the issue of building the faculty? Because there are all sorts of issues involved with having the kind of faculty that'll allow the inquiry, the
Mhm.
discussion you talked about. And also the sort of the structure, tenure versus all the other things that go along with making higher education the failure that it is today. So
Yeah.
could you share a little bit of that with us?
Herbert Gilman, yes, relation. If you, and also perhaps the relationship of research to that and the
Yeah.
place that will have in the university.
Okay, those are huge, big questions. I'll try to encapsulate them. Yeah, so faculty, look, we have some of the most talented, exciting, accomplished faculty in the world already knocking on our door. Because I think at the heart, those who are engaged in the kind of enterprise of scholarship, of teaching, and that, in their heart, most people want to live according to the principles that we represent. That's why they do what they do. The idea, by the way, that universities are swamped over with, scheming Marxist professors whose whole purpose in life is to corrupt the minds of the youths. That's not true. There are lots of Marxist professors and lots of people on the left. Most members of the faculty are really dedicated, well-intentioned people who have callings that they're trying to live out. Now, institutionally, there are political and ideological forces at play that really impact students. I think individually, there are wonderful professors out there. I'm not very concerned about attracting great faculty. And we want faculty at all levels. We want young PhDs moving into the system that will find great faculty. The question of tenure, I will say this, we recognize that one of the reasons for the ideological asymmetry that we have at institutions now is the way that tenure is currently constituted. One of the important components of tenure is that faculty get to hire their own peers, right? So they're the gatekeepers. And so, consciously or not, and I think most of this is unconscious bias, they gravitate towards people who are more likely to feel comfortable to them. And with each iteration of a hiring cycle, you see the faculty departments moving in one direction, never ratchets the other way. So as an institution that wants to be committed to intellectual pluralism, that's something we have to solve. Now, I do think faculty should play a very important role in hiring and assessing others because they know that, but we need to, that's a puzzle for us to figure out. I also think there are other ways, there are other problems with tenure. I mean, tenure is a caste system. Okay, you have a small number of professors, highly paid, who sit at the top of the tenure system and teach very little. And underneath them, to enable them to teach that, so the institutions can afford that, you have cohorts of adjunct faculty who are not paid at the same rate, many of whom are struggling to make ends meet in that. There's something inequitable about that. That's not the way things should be, because adjunct faculty are just as qualified and just as ambitious and have given just as much to participate in the system. So thinking about that, thinking about a pay system that is equitable and fair, and how that intersects with tenure. But these are, we have time to figure this out. We're having
Not much.
not much time, kind of rapidly. 2 weeks from now, we're having in Austin what we're calling our first principles summit. We want to be very intentional in creating an institution that puts in place the structures that will guarantee that we maintain our principles over time, whether they're questions about governance, campus culture, foundational documents and that. So we're gathering in a few weeks, a few dozen of some of the most knowledgeable and committed people across not just higher education, but public intellectuals as well across the country, who have thought deeply about issues of open inquiry and its challenges in colleges and other related issues. And we're going to get together for a weekend and we're just going to start talking about these things, start hashing them out, start thinking through these issues. And every single spring, we're going to have our first principles summit so that we go back and reflect over the year before to make sure that we're adhering to the principles. We're constantly assessing our progress, making sure we're moving in the right direction, making sure we can make adjustments. Because you can't adhere to principles over time unless you're constantly and intentionally working to uphold them. You can't take these things for granted.
We have time for one more question. Um, so I know John has been waiting for a bit.
Okay, thanks. Hi, John Haidt, co-founder of Heterodox Academy, NYU Stern, and proud member of the Board of Advisors of University of Austin. Thank you. So I hope you can expand a bit more on student culture. And the reason is this. The culture is absolutely vital in any startup, in any organization. Having a good culture is vital. And the student culture on elite campuses is somewhat sick. It's not the kids' fault. It's the fact that they were not given any autonomy as children. They were supervised. They were regulated. They come to college. There's the dean of this, the dean of that, the DEI bureaucracy. Sex is regulated. Speech is regulated. Everything's regulated. So I'm certainly a big fan of just taking it all off and giving them more free-range childhoods. But if you do that as they're coming in, you could have all kinds of blow-ups that would, of course, be blown up on Twitter and embarrass the university. So this is a real challenge for the university. Have you thought about how to get an excellent student culture consistent with the principles that are being formulated by the grown-ups? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Thanks. Look, you can't foster a culture of civility without purposefully cultivating it. So, from the moment students get on campus, this is a culture that has to be modeled. You have to teach them how to have difficult conversations. They have to watch the members of the community, the faculty, the staff, having conversations that are grounded in trust, that are grounded in, I always say in our classrooms, this was the case at St. John's, it'll be the case at Uatx, there are only two rules. The first rule is every opinion must be heard. The second rule is every opinion must be backed up by evidence. Right? Abide by those rules, learn how to speak to each other. So you have to create this in ways that are both in the classroom, but outside, that sort of, you create a pervasive culture of, let's call it civil discourse or, mutual trust and, as you foster dignity. Look, how do you do this? Wow, what a challenge. I'll tell a quick story. I was having lunch with somebody today and she had just visited, I won't name the institution, it's an Ivy League institution where she sits on the advisory board for the creative writing program there. And the students came to this meeting to talk to the advisory board people, and they had lots of things to complain about. One of their complaints was that they had to apply for admission into the advanced creative writing courses. They said that made them feel unsafe. and this woman I was actually asked, what does that mean? And they said, well, we apply, and then there's a period of time that we don't know what's going to happen. And we feel really unsafe not knowing what's going to happen. And I thought the definition of safety has been expanded beyond any logical meaning at this point. But these, again, I don't blame the students, right? This is the culture that they're living in. We live in this kind of safetyist culture. What we need to do is teach them that risk is essential to learning, all right? And so we need to present them with risky things and allow them to fail and be there to catch them after they fail, not prevent them from failing. I don't have a magic formula for this yet, but it is certainly part of the blueprint for the campus culture that I think, look, neuroscientists, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a Shakespeare guy, I don't know science, but I believe scientists when they tell me things. Neuroscientists say, and John will know this, that, that the human brain, it used to be believed the human brain kind of stopped developing around the age of 14, and then you just stuffed content into it. But now the brain is actively, we know, developing into the early 20s. Synapses are still being formulated. And the way that young people learn, especially boys, is by taking risks and learning what works and what doesn't, and then pulling back. So how are we going to teach young people who are literally hardwired to learn by taking risks if we cocoon them in safety when they get to educational institutions, right? We're mummifying their intellect, and we need to find a way to break through that. And part of it is we're just going to warn them, and we're going to tell their parents, like, you may fail, or you may get your feelings hurt, or you may get upset, and that's a good thing. So So I hope you'll help us work on that issue. Thank you.
Everyone, this has been such an enlightening and invigorating conversation. We're at a moment where there's a widespread sense of malaise, the sense that American society is stagnant, American society is dysfunctional. But then you occasionally come across someone like Pano, who's really trying to build a new institution, and then you get a sense of the immense resources in this country of other people who are looking to build and create and change as well. And I must say, I find it very heartening, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Pano, and please join me in giving him a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody.